Were these scenes of chaos sparked by social media?
It's incredibly tragic. More than 80 people we now know died. They either drowned or are crushed.
60,000 migrants risked their lives to reach Spain from Morocco. Dozens have died. Hundreds are still stranded. Thousands have been returned. The tragedy has reignited the migration debate across Europe, and politicians are now being accused of weaponising the events in Ceuta.
It looks like an invasion of a country.
So, how did this happen? Could the crisis have been prevented? And did social media make all of this worse? Here's the breakdown. At the end of July, tens of thousands of migrants crossed into Ceuta from Morocco. It's connected to Morocco in North Africa, but belongs to Spain. Ceuta's one of the only land borders between the EU and Africa, and it's tiny, with a population of just 84,000 people. Scenes of the chaos were broadcast across the world.
Spain is scrambling to regain control.
Elle est arrivée à Ceuta où 49 000.
After around 60,000 migrants entered.
At least 70 people have died. Many drowned. Others were crushed as they climbed border fences.
It's a bad life in Morocco. That's why we get swimming to here.
Nothing. Just sitting in your home or working for 12 hours for a less salary.
There's a number of reasons why this might have happened. One is misinformation on social media. A month before these crossings, judges in Spain's Supreme Court ruled that, quote, migrants intercepted in the sea while swimming towards Ceuta cannot lawfully be subjected to Spain's border rejection procedure. That ruling was misinterpreted as meaning if you swam to Ceuta, you can stay and couldn't be turned back. That's false. But that didn't stop the fake news going viral.
Parece que esta lectura de la sentencia del Tribunal Supremo pues ha corrido como la pólvora durante estas últimas horas por las redes de mafia que trafican con seres humanos.
In Britain, Reform UK MP Suella Braverman posted on social media that, quote, these men are on their way to the UK right now. Also false. The migrants never reached mainland Europe, and the majority of them have now returned back to Morocco. Even if they had made it, travel from Ceuta to Europe has strict border checks. But Braverman's not the only politician to get involved. Italy brought back stronger border checks for visitors from Spain, and France tightened its own borders too. EU leaders have questioned Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez over the country's migration policies, including allowing undocumented migrants to apply for residency and for work permits, all to support Spain's ageing population. This isn't the first time this has happened. In 2021, around 10,000 people crossed into Ceuta from Morocco, raising diplomatic tensions. Now, once again, Ceuta has exposed divisions over the sensitive issue of migration. This time fueled by social media, and possibly sparked by it too. So what does it say about the politics of migration in Europe? And what part has misinformation played in this latest crisis? To help answer those questions, I'm going to bring in Gerald Knaus. He's an expert on migration and the chair of the European Stability Initiative think tank. Gerald Knaus, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. Those chaotic scenes that we saw have gone all over the world. What was your reaction when you first saw it?
I think it's really important to understand that it depends whether you look at it from the point of view of somebody in Britain or Germany or Sweden, or whether you live in that Spanish city. I mean, this is a small town, 85,000 people, and suddenly in one day, basically, 50 to 60,000, mainly young men, Moroccans, enter the city on an extremely dangerous route. I mean, they swim around the barrier because there is a high wall, there are fences with barbed wire all around that Spanish town, because it's located in North Africa. So all around it is Morocco, another country. And so all these people, suddenly in one day, the number increases by 50,000. They swim to the beach of that city. It's incredibly tragic. More than 80 people we now know died. They either drown or are crushed. And in the city itself, it feels like, what's happening? Everybody closes their shops. Everybody goes home. The whole town freezes because this is totally unexpected. So for the city, and I think for the people who are involved in this, the young Moroccans, this was a traumatic day. But what has happened in the rest of Europe, or in the rest of the world, but especially in Europe, is very, very strange. Suddenly everybody, or some people, seem to suggest that there are huge numbers of people now, millions, about to come from Africa to Europe. This happened in North Africa. Nobody in these days of chaos actually even managed to come to Europe, to the continent. And yet the fear everywhere seems to be, oh my God, what we see there in this town will now happen everywhere. And that's just not true. That's just not true.
Why do you think that happened then? We saw the reaction from Italy and France saying to Spain, what's going on? We're going to close our borders. And that's not what you do in the EU. You're meant to have open borders between countries. So what's gone on here?
Well, to directly answer why, for example, the Italian Prime Minister suggested something that is really, really silly, right? Spain and Italy have no border. France is in between. So if Italy says we will now check the Spanish, which normally you're not supposed to, when they come to Italy, she's talking about a few airplanes, with tourists coming from Madrid or Barcelona in Spain. That's not going to make any difference at all. The fear of the governments across Europe is that if their people, their public, sees these images of thousands, tens of thousands of people coming into a town, they might think that this will happen to them. And in order to look like they have a response, no, we will stop it, they want to do something. But what they do is silly. And that's part of the problem the last 10 years. When people are afraid of migration, they have these fears of being, the word is invaded, large numbers coming. Politicians often feel we need to respond. But then what they do is not going to work. So it makes the public even more distrustful that the politicians can restore control.
What we have seen in the UK, which you'll probably be familiar with, is Reform UK in particular. They did a press conference where they said they're going to get the Navy involved if they get into power to push people back. Also, one of their spokespeople went to Ceuta and spoke to some of the Moroccans who came over, and they said that they told them that they were trying to get to the UK.
First of all, you can't even get to Spain easily from Ceuta. There is a sea in between. There's checks. You need documents. It looks like many of the Moroccans came into Ceuta and didn't have documents. Also, most of them, not all, but most of them left again. They're no longer there. So what you have is a few thousand people probably now there. It's very hard for them to get to Spain. Perhaps they will get to Spain eventually. But then many of them will stay in Spain. There are Moroccans who work in Spain illegally. But we are talking about very small numbers. The total number of all people from all of Africa and the Middle East who crossed in the first half of this year into the whole of the European Union, that is Spain and Italy and Greece and Cyprus and Malta, all the places, all the countries in the south of Europe. Total number, 50,000 in 6 months. That's the number of one day in Ceuta. So this one day was completely exceptional. There is normally, at the moment, almost no irregular migration from Africa and the Middle East to Europe. So these fears are irrational, but unfortunately, because the images are so powerful, and images beat statistics. You see these images, and if you believe the story that this is typical, you are afraid. Imagine if London experiences what Ceuta experiences. How many people live in London now? 8 million. So So in one day, 6 million people suddenly from all around, from a different country, storm without anything into London. Now, important to say, the next day, almost all of them leave again. But this would be probably a shock to some people.
Let's look at why this happened then. Social media seems to have whipped up this situation. What do you know about some of the misinformation that's going around?
Well, in this specific case, it still needs to be investigated, but Spanish media looked at social media and there was a lot of disinformation. Actually, 50,000, let's say it was 50,000 people. For Ceuta, that's a huge crowd, but that's, I don't know, if there is a Premier League game, there are more people in the stadium, right? If there's a pop concert, there are probably more people going to a concert. Next to Ceuta, there are cities with 1.3 million people. You can, especially if this is organized or exploited, easily get a group of young people, Morocco as a young population, to come together. And the disinformation was, if you swim, you will not be stopped, you might get into Spain or perhaps into Europe. This misinformation was sent in social media to lots and lots of people. Some journalists talked to some of the Moroccans who went into Ceuta, and they said that they believed that this was now open. They were themselves shocked. I mean, people died in huge numbers. So this was extremely dangerous, but people didn't expect this. And we also don't know what the Moroccan state was doing. This is a very strong state. You could say a police state, very strong police. They can be quite tough, not to say brutal, if they want to be, but they didn't stop people. You know, you need to imagine people have to go on the Moroccan side to the coast and then they swim around the barrier. But for tens of thousands of people to get there, normally the Moroccans would stop them. So this is why there are so many theories about, you know, did the Moroccans allow this to happen? Did anybody organize it? Was it meant to be a signal to Spain? Wait, if you don't do what we want on some issues, we can do this again.
So if they sent a signal, this could be as a result of a diplomatic spat then?
And here the theories, because we don't have hard evidence, are all over the place. I mean, it begins with the fact that Morocco actually claims those territories. It says that Ceuta and Melilla, those two Spanish towns, which have been under the control of first Portugal and then Spain for 600 years. And the population there is very mixed, but they are Spanish citizens. But Morocco says they should be in Morocco. But it hasn't actually aggressively pushed for this, but there are pressures. Like the border at sea is not clearly defined because Morocco says, look, we are challenging Spanish presence here. Recently, Spain has become very unpopular with the United States. And suddenly you see people in the United States in a resolution in the US Parliament, I mean in the House of Representatives, that says Ceuta and Melilla are disputed territory. Now, you don't normally say that about the territory of an ally. You've had reports in think tanks that say perhaps Morocco should take it back in some way. This is not US policy officially, but the US has criticized Spain aggressively. Donald Trump really doesn't like the Spanish government because it didn't support him in Iran. And he also says that they are soft on migration, which, as we've seen, isn't true.
All of this happened before in 2021 in Ceuta. What happened then?
Well, in 2021, we also had first 6,000, then 8,000, some say 10,000 people, young Moroccans, cross into the town. And at that time, we know it was because Morocco wanted to scare and intimidate Spain because of Spanish foreign policy. Spain at that time was treating somebody in its hospitals that the Moroccans didn't like. He was the leader of an independence movement in a part that Morocco says is Moroccan, the West Sahara. He was from that organization, Polisario Front, and he was allowed by the Spanish to be in a Spanish hospital. And when this came out, the Moroccans basically allowed, intimidated, organized for 10,000 people to go into Ceuta.
When this happened before in 2021, we had social media then. So now it's happened again in 2026. Do you think the numbers we've seen and the explosion in numbers we've seen is because of a more concentrated role of social media then? Is that a possible theory that works?
I mean, it is possible. What I would urge the Europeans to do instead of quarreling and accusing each other is to appoint a commission, somebody credible, to seriously investigate what happened. Ideally, invite the Moroccans. If the Moroccans didn't organize it, they should have an interest to clarify. But I'm not optimistic, actually, on this. My experience is in these things, many have no interest in really understanding what happened. And of course, there is always the possibility, and I'm not saying in this case, because I honestly don't know, but if I watch this as somebody who wants to weaken the European Union, divide European countries, make them fight with each other, help the far right, and I watch this, let's say from Moscow, what would I do? I would start thinking, how could I have more of this? You know, is there a way to have more waves of refugees or migrants somewhere else? So the European Union needs to have an answer to be less vulnerable. In 2015, suddenly a group of Syrians appeared. There was a year of many Syrian refugees on the border with Norway. And they were all, young, strong men, and they appeared in the north of Russia. And they were put up in a nice hotel, and then they took bikes, and then they cycled to the border with Norway. There was a refugee crisis with Syrians there. And it was very unclear if, in fact, these were Syrian refugees or this was just a staged operation. Everything points to this was an attempt to scare the Norwegians. And in 2021, refugees appeared at the Polish border of Belarus. Again, there we know that Belarus was trying to recruit people, offering them lies. You could easily go to Germany, just pay money, and then brought Iraqis and others to that border. So the idea that you look at Europe and you see European governments afraid of migration and publics, that you then think, oh, how can we use that, organize it? That is not a crazy conspiracy theory. But you still, in every individual case, need to prove it. So that's why I say I don't know here. But we do know that that has happened, and we must fear that it will happen again.
Parties here in the UK, like the Conservatives, like Reform UK, who have said that we need to come out of the European Convention on Human Rights to actually tackle this issue and make sure that when people do come over, they can be sent back. What do you make of that argument? Because that seems to have picked up steam with those particular parties and with people who say that illegal migration, in their view, is too high.
Well, it's really interesting to ask how this would work in practice. So Britain gets out of the European Convention on Human Rights, which, it should be said, British conservatives played a key role in writing in 1949, 1950. This was a very much a British invention, because Britain after World War II said, we are all safer if we have these rules that we can keep governments to the respect of basic human rights. So it is a British, it's even a conservative British idea, which was supported by the British Labour government at the time. But let's say it's gone. Then Britain leaves also the Council of Europe, another European institution, it's out. And then people come from France, like last week, one day, 800 in boats. They arrive in Britain, and then Britain says, well, what does it say? It says, we will not check your asylum claim. We are also getting out of the Refugee Convention, because that's not the European Convention on Rights, that's the Refugee Convention. And we also get out of the Torture Convention, so we can send you to El Salvador. No, they won't do that. That's a convention that Britain has also signed. Britain will say, we want to send you back to where? In fact, you can send them back to France now with the European Convention on Human Rights in place. It's not an obstacle. The only obstacle is, are there countries willing to take them? There is no human right to go to Britain. There is a human right not to be sent to a place of torture. But if you have Germany agreeing to take everyone who arrives in Britain, clearly it's not a place of torture. The Conservatives, or any new future government, or Labour now, could send all of them when they arrive to Germany. The only question is, how do you persuade Germany that it's in Germany's interest? In 2 weeks you would stop it. and going out of the European Convention on Human Rights. You can be against, you can be in favor. I think it would be a great shame if Britain leaves something that has been a central part of its great success in Europe in the last 100 years, to have this treaty, to have this. But okay, Britain leaves. But then it won't make it easier to return anyone.
Gerald, I just wanted to ask you very finally and briefly what this whole episode really says about where we are with migration in 2026. How does it sum up where we're going?
Well, it shows us something that we have known, but that is dangerous, which is that dramatic images beat statistics every time. What I mean with statistics is the numbers of what's actually happening normally. When in one day more people come to Spain than in the whole of last year, people believe that one day is typical. And they forget that in fact at the moment we have low irregular migration, few people coming to the European Union. We have low asylum application numbers in Sweden and Denmark and Germany and Austria. That at the moment all of this is much more under control than it was 3 years, 5 years, 10 years ago. People forget that. The images dominate the debate. That's why we talk, because of the images in Ceuta. And if the images are where we stop and we don't think, well, what's really happening? Then we are in a trap. But also, the other trap is to say, but it's just an image. Let's ignore it. That's not how politics works. We need to have an answer to prevent this happening without falling into the panic based on a completely distorted view that millions of Africans are about to come to Europe. They are not.
Gerald Knaus, thank you very much for speaking to us. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
I thank you. All the best.
That's the breakdown. Thanks for watching. See you next time.